This conference will now be recorded.
Once again, I do want to thank the Hightstown Memorial Branch Association, as well as the Friends of the West Windsor Branch for making this program possible this evening. Tonight we have Dr. Brian Regal, who is an Associate Professor of the History of Science, Technology, and Medicine at Keene University here in New Jersey. He teaches classes on science and medical history, as well as pseudoscience, alchemy, and book history. His most recent book, which came out in 2018, is The Secret History of the Jersey Devil, How Quakers, Hucksters, and Benjamin Franklin Created a Monster. He's written many other books. He has also appeared on the History Channel and the Science Channel talking about monsters in the series True Monsters and Mythical Beasts, and 2021's Hulu special, Sasquatch. He was an invited panel speaker at Comic-Con in New York City in 2018, and an NBC TV special on Harry Potter and alchemy. He is also the author of numerous articles and op-ed pieces, and is currently working on a book on American discovery myths, tentatively titled Waiting for Columbus. So Dr. Regal, thank you so much for presenting this evening.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming in. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the Jersey Devil tonight. And before we get into it, I always have to say this, that if you came here tonight because you want to hear me talk about how the Jersey Devil is real, I am really going to disappoint you. Because there is no Jersey Devil, it's not real. We might as well just get that out of the way. You know, let me disappoint you right from the start. So I don't want to get your hopes up about that. But I'm going to tell. Oh, and Bigfoot's not real either. Neither is the Loch Ness Monster or Chupacabra or any of those others. What I'm going to tell you, though, I think, is a much more interesting story. The story of the Jersey Devil is only partly a monster story. It is a story which involves the origins of the United States, the origins of New Jersey. It involves political duplicity and funny uses of tax money, and it involves land grabs and bad treatment of the native people, and it involves all the sort of bare knuckle politics that we think we invented here in the 21st century. But one of the things I hope you'll get from my talk here is that this sort of thing goes all the way back in American history. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. And so let's start off. Here's the famous drawing that you've probably all seen. This is the image that everybody gets into their head when they think Jersey Devil, a kind of cross between a horse and a deer and an antelope with leathery bat wings and sort of a horsey head, a long tail with a point on it, claws and hooves. That kind of runs around the Pine Barrens, affrighting people. And for those of you who may not know, let me give you the 30-second version of the legend of the Jersey Devil. Around 1735, in the Pine Barrens, outside Burlington. So if you're from Burlington, this was happening in your neighborhood. A woman named Mother Leeds gives birth to her 13th child. And if that wasn't bad enough, as the child is breaching, she screams out in pain, let this one be a devil. And rather than a normal baby coming out, the thing you're looking at on the screen, probably a little smaller, but this is what pops out. Everybody in the room, the family, the midwives, everybody's freaking out because of this thing has just shown up. And it sort of screams at everybody, and to get away, rather than going out the door, it climbs into the fireplace, goes up the chimney, kind of a reverse Santa Claus sort of thing, and disappears off into the woods, and will spend the next couple of centuries sort of scaring people, walking through the woods and doing sort of monstery things. But that's not the story we're going to talk about. That's the mythological part. I'm going to tell you the real story of this creature. So here we are. This is a map from around the time that this is all going on. Now I don't know if you can see my little finger moving around here, but here's the basic area that we're talking about. Here's New Jersey. Here's New York up here, and Newark would be right here. Philadelphia is right here. Pennsylvania, here's Delaware Bay, the Atlantic Ocean. So this is the basic neighborhood where all the action is. And this is Lord Cornbury. Now, I don't know, they used to teach the story of Lord Cornbury in grammar schools here in New Jersey. I don't know if they still do. But Lord Cornbury was governor, the first royal governor of New Jersey. New Jersey's had a number of names in the past. It was New Netherlands for a while. It was New Sweden for a while. It was Novo Caesarea for a while. And in 1701, the British government decides to make the region there a royal colony. And the land had been given as a gift by the King Charles II to the guy named Carteret. And because the Carteret family came from an island in the English Channel called Jersey, when the king gave him this region, he renamed it Jersey after his family's home. And there were a number of various different small-scale leaders, but in 1701, the British Crown decides to make New Jersey a royal colony. And that means it gets a royal governor. And its first governor is Lord Cornbury. He has some issues with the treasury. Monies kind of disappear in ways they probably shouldn't have. And he gets accused of all sorts of nefarious behavior. He is considered one of the worst governors in New Jersey history. And if you know anything about New Jersey history, that's no mean feat to be called one of the worst governors. And as we're sitting here talking and you're looking at this picture, you're probably wondering why I'm showing this picture of a woman, obviously a woman in a blue dress. That's because enemies of Lord Cornbury's accused him of being a cross-dresser, which was sort of the equivalent today to being accused of being woke or a socialist, or, think of any bad thing, that political name that people throw around today, to be called a cross-dresser back then in the early 1700s was a pretty damning thing. And so this is a painting which still resides in the New York Historical Society to this day. I don't know if they're open yet. They probably are open by now. And if you go into New York and do some sightseeing, you want to go do some museuming, I recommend you go take a look at the New York Historical Society. It's right across the street from Central Park, right across the street from the American Museum of Natural History. And when you walk in, one of the first things you'll see is this painting. And they used to label it Portrait of Lord Cornbury. We now know that this is not a portrait of Lord Cornbury. We have no idea who this person is. But it was latched upon by Cornbury's enemies at some point. We're not sure who the painter is, but this is still the picture. If you Google Lord Cornbury, you'll probably get this picture. But he probably was not a cross-dresser. All that other stuff that was said about him was probably true, but the cross-dressing probably not. So what does this have to do with the Jersey Devil? Well, when Cornbury becomes the governor of New Jersey and New York simultaneously, he gets assigned to him about 10 or 12 local sort of movers and shakers to be his local counselors. And one of them is the star of our story here, Daniel Leeds. Daniel Leeds is born in England in 1651. in the town of Leeds, not the big industrial city of Leeds that most people think of if you know anything about England. It's a much smaller town called Leeds. Just like here in America, there's like 1,000 Springfields and, there's 1,000 middle towns from one end of America to another. And in England, Leeds is one of these town names that you find all over the place. But he first comes to America around 1677 or 78. We're not exactly sure when he does. He's about 25 when he comes over. He's a Quaker. He's married a number of times. He's married in England, but his first wife, who we have no idea who that is, she dies, and then he and his family, his father and his brothers, his mother dies of the plague in London, of smallpox in London, because she wouldn't get vaccinated when they had vaccinations. And so the boys come over, and he gets married to Anne Stacy in 1681, who dies. Very quickly after that, he marries the daughter of a friend of his. She gives birth, then dies. It wasn't good for your health to be married to Daniel Leeds. He's got a whole string of wives. They all die young or early, except for Dorothy Young, who before she dies, she manages to produce 8 children. He marries a final time to a woman named Jane. There are some versions of the Jersey Devil story where Mother Leeds is called Jane. We have no idea whether Mother Leeds was an actual person or not. My co-author and I, Frank Esposito, when we were working on this project, we wanted to try to track down who was Mother Leeds. I'll talk a little bit more about her later, but we were never able to find anybody referred to as Mother Leeds. So she's probably a fictional character. His next to youngest is Titan, his son Titan. He's really the most important child in all this, and we'll come back to him in a bit. And so the Leeds family comes to America. They settle in Burlington, and they start building a life for themselves. This is not a drawing of Daniel Leeds. We have no drawings, no drawings survive, but he probably would have looked like this. This is a drawing of George Fox, the head of the Quakers, who was initially a friend of Daniel Leeds, then they become enemies. But this is sort of a typical garb of a Quaker man living in New Jersey in the late 1600s, early 1700s, just to kind of give you an idea what the fashions were like. Now, Daniel Leeds is a really interesting guy. He can't go to college in England because he's a Quaker. You had to be an Anglican to be able to go to school over there. And so the Quakers refuse to convert to Anglicanism. So that means they can't go to college. They can't go to Cambridge. They can't go to Oxford. They can't go to any of the schools. But the Quakers were very much into the importance of education. And so what they do is they start these kind of private circles of education where they trade books and they have tutors for their kids. They saw education as so important that they were willing to risk being arrested just so they could get a good education. And Daniel Leeds is no different. He's fascinated by science and history and theology and astronomy and astrology. And he's kind of a Renaissance man. You know, we throw that term around a lot, Renaissance man, but he was kind of like that. He was into everything. He's the sort of person who could never learn enough. He always wanted to learn more. And he was fascinated by education. He was fascinated by knowledge and science. He was deeply religious, which is interesting because today we don't tend to associate religious people with belief in science. If you believe in science, you're not religious. If you're religious, you don't believe in science. During this period, that sort of idea is not believed in, even if a sign of being a good Christian for people in the late 17th, early 18th century was being intelligent, was being smart, was being educated. And so Daniel Leeds has this idea. He wants to bring the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, to New Jersey. Keep in mind, today New Jersey is very urban. When people think of New Jersey, they think of, Bruce Springsteen and the Sopranos and the Turnpike and the oil refineries and all, very urban, very industrial. But in the days of Daniel Leeds, it's the complete opposite. New Jersey was literally the edge of the empire. The Watchung Mountains was, and people didn't know what was beyond the Watchung Mountains. That was the moon to them. And so Leeds wants to bring education, he wants to bring literature, he wants to bring science and history to this rural backwater place and make it a place of erudition and sophistication. And he decides to do this by making an almanac. Almanacs, and you can see the picture here. This is the original first Daniel Leeds almanac. And almanacs were very popular because, they only cost, like a penny. And they were sort of the Facebook, the Twitter, the online social media of the day, because everybody read them, everybody looked at them. This is the one thing, and if you published an almanac, you knew everyone was going to see it. And so Leeds publishes an almanac, and he thinks, this is how I'm going to make my society a better place. He thinks everybody's going to love it. It's the first almanac published south of New York. And to his chagrin, all of his fellow Quakers hate this. They think it's too wrapped up in the occult. They think it's kind of blasphemous. And rather than simply not reading it, they round up every copy they can get their hands on them and they destroy them. So Daniel Leeds is not just the first author in New Jersey history, he's also the first censored author. In fact, it's very difficult to find originals of this. You can find copies online, scanned copies online, but there are less than half a dozen. I had to go all the way to London to the British Library to see an actual copy to hold in my hands. That's how thorough the Quakers were. We normally think of the Quakers as these kind of fun people who are very liberal and they first abolitionists and really decent people. And for the most part, they were, but they had their dark side as well, and they did not like Leeds's almanac, and so they destroy it. Part of that is because almanacs at the time were connected to astrology. Now, what you're looking at here, this is not actually a Leeds almanac. I'm going to show you another one of those in a minute. But this picture here, this is called the Zodiac Man. This was a medical illustration. And this was at a time when people still thought the various signs of the zodiac dictated your health. And so you can see the different signs pointing at different parts of the body. And that means that part that the drawing is pointing at, that is the sign that helped you. And so medical people were medical astrologers. So when you got sick, they would cast your horoscope, and that's how they'd figure out how to take care of you. And so the Quakers saw this as very occult-like and inappropriate. So that's why they destroy his first almanac. Then Leeds thinks, okay, well, maybe the almanac wasn't the right thing to do. So he puts together a book called The Temple of Wisdom. The first book published in America, south of New York, called The Temple of Wisdom for the Little World. This comes out in 1688. And he thinks, okay, they didn't like the almanac. They're going to love my book. And they hate the book even more than they hate the almanac. And they go about destroying the copies of the Temple of Wisdom. In fact, there's only one known copy left, and that's currently in the Pennsylvania Historical Society in Philadelphia. If it wasn't for that one remaining copy, we would never even know that Daniel Leeds published this book. And in it, he tries to put in all of his ideas about science and history and theology and astrology and astronomy and God and Christianity. But the Quakers hate it, and so they destroy it. He gets called evil by his fellow Quakers. His great Quaker enemy, Calipuzzi, calls him Satan's harbinger. And so, this is not good. These sort of things seem almost quaint and cute to us today to call someone Satan's harbinger. But in the year 1700, that was as bad an insult as you can imagine. And so he gets upset. Leeds gets upset. Here is the title page from the Temple of Wisdom. If you ever find one of these, like a great-great-grandmother's attic somewhere, don't throw it away because you just hit the jackpot. It is highly valuable. Surviving Leeds almanacs. I saw one sold by Sotheby's a couple years ago, went for almost $10,000. And so the Temple of Wisdom would be, a fortune if anybody could come up with one. So keep an eye out for that. It'd be like hitting the lottery. Now, Leeds did have his fans. I found this letter up in Boston in the Increased Mather papers, and it's kind of hard to read, and it's old. You can see it's all stained, but this was a fan letter. Someone wrote to Daniel Leeds saying how much he loved the Temple of Wisdom. So we know that this, before it was destroyed, the book got as far as Boston, probably in New York. There probably are copies of it out there, but we haven't found any yet. So he did have his admirers. Then he decides, they burned my first almanac, they burned my book, I'm going to make another almanac. So now he produces the American Almanac, the Leeds Almanac, and he begins to publish this. He says, "The hell with the Quakers." He leaves the Quaker Church. He converts to becoming an Anglican, and he goes to war with the Quakers. He publishes books about how horrible they are. They publish books about how horrible he is, and so you have this kind of tennis match back and forth of pro and anti-Quaker publications, pro and anti-Leeds publications. Leeds uses the almanac. He starts publishing it as a booklet, kind of like the old TV guide, if you remember what TV guides look like. It kind of looked like that, about that size. And he's a forward thinker. He tells his readers, stop smoking and drinking and start buying books and making your own library and teaching yourself. Stop hanging out at the bar. He tells people to look up at the stars and study astronomy. He is the first person, one of the first people in North America to support in print the Copernican heliocentric view of the universe. That is the idea that the Earth goes around the sun, which not everyone believed at the time. That was still kind of up in the air. He reads Galileo. He likes Galileo. He wants everybody to read all this stuff. And he puts all this into the almanac. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this kind of close up here is because this, what you're looking at, what I'm circling right here, this is the Leeds family coat of arms. The traditional legends of the Jersey Devil have the Leeds family as these kind of debased country bumpkins living in squalor, which is far from the reality as possible. The Leeds were erudite people, they were intelligent, and they were high enough on the British food chain before they came to America to have their own coat of arms. And part of the reason why I'm showing you this is if you look close, you can see these little figures. Some people think these might be wyverns, which are kind of dragons. Some people think they're falcons, but they look sort of like the classic view of what the Jersey Devil looks like, kind of a horsey head, wings, clawed feet. And this is way before any of that idea came around. So it's always found it interesting that the Leeds Family Almanac had these sort of drawings involved in it. Now that brings us to Ben Franklin. Franklin shows up in Philadelphia famously, and he too starts an almanac, Richard's Almanac, but his big competitor, of course, is the Leeds Almanac, because by now the Leeds Almanac has become very popular. Everybody reads it. The Leeds family's making money off of it, and Ben Franklin wants to tap into that revenue stream. So the first thing he does is he pulls a publicity stunt. By now, Daniel Leeds has passed away. He dies in 1721, but his son, Titan, takes over, publishing the Almanac. And Ben Franklin and Titan Leeds are around the same age. They know each other. They don't like each other. Well, Titan Leeds certainly doesn't like Franklin. But Franklin starts putting out these stories that the Leeds family are into the occult, that they're sorcerers, and that when Titan Leeds starts going back at Franklin, Franklin says, I don't know who this Titan Leeds is who's attacking me, because Titan Leeds is dead when he was actually alive. This is just Franklin making this up to sell copies of his almanac. You know, we think of publicity stunts and people lying in public as a very modern thing, but this goes all the way back to the earliest days. And Leeds says that Franklin's an idiot. I'm still alive. And Franklin says, well, I don't know who this is, because my good friend Titan Leeds is dead. So it must be that Titan Leeds has come back from the dead and is a sorcerer. And everybody believes him. You know, Ben Franklin is one of the first people in American history to realize if you say something crazy and outrageous, the more crazy and the more outrageous it is, the more people will believe it. And so his ploy works. Poor Richard's Almanac becomes successful, and the Leeds Almanac dwindles and disappears. And this is also around the same time that people are just beginning to think about independence. We're talking about the 1740s, 1750s, and the notion of maybe we should break away from the British Empire is just starting to be sort of discussed. And because the Leeds family was connected to Lord Cornbury, the government governor, that's like another strike against them, because now the Leeds family is seen as un-American because they support the empire. And so you start to hear things about the Leeds devil. And the Leeds devil was actually a political thing. It wasn't a monster. It was kind of a political insult to call somebody the Leeds devil is to say you're un-American, you're not a good American, you're siding with the enemy. And so this notion of Leeds devil, notion of the Leeds family being involved in the occult is starting to grow slowly but surely. It'll take a while, but it's starting to grow and spread. Now, there have been all sorts of pamphlet wars in the same way we have, people scream at each other on Twitter and Facebook and on TV talk shows. This was being done back then as well, but it was done in print because, there's no electricity yet. And so if you look here, this is an actual illustration, a political cartoon from the period, and you can see this creature starting to appear. Now, this has nothing to do with the Jersey Devil yet. Here's another great one right here, but this notion of this kind of monstery, bat-winged creature that runs around chasing people, killing people, and eating people is around before the Leeds family. And so this image will then get co-opted and thrown at the Leeds family and become the kind of classic image of what the Jersey Devil is. And again, this illustration here is from the 1640s, so way before the Leeds family has even come to America. This image is still being used in the public sphere. Here's another one. Again, we can see this image, very popular back then. Now, if you're a Jersey Devil aficionado and you go online and you search for Jersey Devil information, you'll sometimes come across something called the Vance Larner Diary. This is something that was supposedly written in 1790. It is used by believers in the monster version of all this, that, oh, well, all the way back to 1790, people were seeing this thing. It's not a new thing. It's the problem with the Vance Larner diary is that it's fake. There is no Vance Larner diary. Someone made it up in the late 20th century. Frank Esposito and I went through a huge amount of effort scouring libraries and archives all around the Northeast, looking for this. All of our connections in the world of libraries and archives were helping us looking for it, and it just doesn't exist. And maybe someday it'll turn up. I doubt it. If it does, then I'll change my mind then. But until then, if you ever hear about the Vance Larner diary, or if you've heard about it already, just keep in mind it's fake. Here are some more illustrations of creatures that look like the Jersey Devil but are not the Jersey Devil. This is just to give you an idea that this image had been around for some time. It did not begin with the Leeds Devil. Here's another very popular one. This is the monk calf. Now, as I said before, the character of Mother Leeds is probably, apocryphal, made up, but we weren't looking for it. We thought maybe there's somebody that was used as the model for Mother Leeds. And the closest we could come to is Anne Hutchinson. Anne Hutchinson was a real person, early feminist, very important person, female writer, orator, political activist out of Boston. She battles with the Puritans because she felt women should be treated with equality. Women should be able to preach. Women should be able to hold jobs. And of course, the Protestant clergy hated her for that and ridiculed her. And she had a lot of kids. And her, what might have been, maybe 11, 12, 13th child was stillborn and deformed and, didn't live. But Protestant clergy used this and used her as an example. And he said, see, women, this is what happens when you don't know your place. God did this to Anne Hutchinson for the sin of speaking out. And so we already have, this early in American history, we already have this idea of the crushing of outspoken women. We see it today. We see it in political leaders. Female leaders are often held to a different standard. You have people in the government, in Congress, because they're female, get attacked and insulted. This, again, is nothing new. That's one of the reasons I find this whole story of the Jersey Devil so interesting, is that all the major elements of this are still with us today. Political lying, political shenanigans, hatred of women, it's all still with us, unfortunately. And so there's a possibility that Anne Hutchinson, whose story, she was well known in her day, and the male preachers used her as an example of how women should behave. And so there's a chance that her actual life may have influenced the Leeds Devil story. Okay, so here's the big question that everybody wants to have answered. Where was the Jersey Devil born? Now I'm going to show you. I got a picture of the actual spot. So if you got friends in the audience, family members who are out of the room right now and they want to know, call them in, because I'm going to show you the place where the Jersey Devil was born. Are we ready for this? Are you sitting down? Here it is right here. This is where the Jersey Devil was born. The 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, this magnificent building is no longer there, Victorian building. It's a parking lot now, unfortunately. If you do go into Google Maps and you type in the address 9th and Arch Street in Philadelphia, you'll find a picture of it, but you won't see this picture. You'll just see a bunch of cars parked there. But this was a dime museum. Dime museums were really popular places. They were called a dime museum because it cost 10 cents to get in. They were really popular, and they would have like freak shows and people who could balance plates on their head and animal acts and all sorts of things. If you remember the old circus sideshows, that's basically what dime museums were, but rather than traveling around, they stayed in one place. The Ninth and Arch is famous because they were one of the first places to experiment with, this is the late 19th century, one of the first places to experiment with showing movies. Bought a ticket to watch a movie in here, so they were kind of on the cutting edge. But by the early 20th century, business is off, because just like today, outrageous stuff only lasts for so long, and then we want to see more outrageous stuff. And so they're trying to come up with, they're trying to come up with a new act to draw in the rubes. And 1905, 1909, between Burlington and Atlantic City, these stories start appearing in newspapers about strange goings-on, strange creatures being seen, weird prints left in the snow that no one can identify. And when the press agent for the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum saw these reports, he thought, oh, we just hit the jackpot. He starts writing press releases about a monster running around in the woods. Now remember, up until this time, the Leeds Devil is only sort of kind of associated with monsters. In fact, it's almost all but forgotten. By the end of the 19th and the early 20th century, almost nobody's ever even heard of the Leeds monster, Leeds Devil anymore. And so the guys at the 9th and Arch Street Museum get this great idea. Let's say that the Leeds Devil is a real monster and that we captured him and we brought it in and we're going to have it on display here in our museum. And they think, what a great idea that is. But then they say, wait a minute. Leeds Devil, that name doesn't really roll off the tongue. We need a name with pow. And he sits back and he thinks, I have it. I'm a genius. Jersey Devil. And boom, immediately, we've captured the Jersey Devil. People start flocking in. But the problem is, okay, they got people to come in, but they got to have something to show people. You can't just show them a picture. You got to have a real thing. So they find a guy up in Albany, New York, who rents exotic animals. And somehow this guy's got a kangaroo. God knows where he got a kangaroo in Albany, New York, but he's got a kangaroo. So they rent the kangaroo secretly. They bring it down to Philadelphia. They paint it green. They attach little cardboard wings to it, and they put it in a cage on a stage in the main room at the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum. Dramatic lighting. And they have a little kid hiding in the wings so you can't see him with a long stick with a nail sticking out of the end of it. And you might get an idea for where this is going. They bring in a bunch of paying customers. The little kid behind the screen pokes the poor kangaroo with a nail. The kangaroo starts screaming and jumping around. This scares everybody. The cage is rattling, and they shoo everybody out. They bring in another group. They stab the poor kangaroo again, and this goes on for weeks and weeks. And the museum is making money like crazy. But eventually, people start to decide it doesn't look like a monster. It looks like a kangaroo that somebody painted green. And so people start complaining. And so the guys who run the museum say, yeah, okay, it's a kangaroo. We fooled you. They wash off the poor kangaroo. They send him back to Albany. I have no idea. We were never able to find out what happened to the poor kangaroo after that. And the guys at the museum admit it's a fake, it's a hoax. And people would say, why did you do this? They'd say, hello, we're a dime museum. This is what we fake stuff. This is what we do for a living. The problem here is that despite the fact that the museum people say, look, this is all just a hoax, you know, it's all just a big joke, people start saying, no, it's not a joke. I saw this thing. It looks like a kangaroo with wings. It's real. And from there, it just sort of spins wildly out of control. And throughout the 20th century, we'll have these events where people say they saw it. The cops go out there, armed posses go looking for it. No one ever actually finds it. But throughout the course of the 20th and well into the 21st century, people will say they've seen the Jersey Devil. They say they took pictures of it or they heard it. But that's how we get to this point where people think they see a monster. So what happens is, our story is about a guy who is trying to make the world he lives in a little bit better. And for his trouble, he gets ridiculed, he gets insulted, his family name gets dragged through the mud, and his family is forever associated with a monster. And now this this is the shameless self-promotion part of the talk. Here's the book, The Secret History of the Jersey Devil, by myself and my partner in crime, Frank Esposito. The Secret History of the Jersey Devil: How Quakers, Hucksters, and Benjamin Franklin Created a Monster. Now, if you like monsters and you like my work, and this is available as a paperback now, there's also Searching for Sasquatch, my book from before, the one right before the Sasquatch book, I mean the Jersey Devil book, Crackpots, Eggheads, and Cryptozoology. And I am with the Department of History at Kean University. There's our Twitter page. Here's our department logo. And the last thing I want to say is that a lot of people over the years have said they've seen, you know, glowing red eyes in the woods at night down in the Pine Barrens, and heard rustling in the trees and all of that. I think if you believe in ghosts, I don't believe in ghosts, but the romantic in me, rather than a winged monster, what you might be seeing or hearing is a forlorn man in a Quaker's outfit walking through the woods as the snow falls. And with that, I will say thank you very much for coming to my talk. And do we have any questions?
Thank you so much for such a fun and interesting talk. I learned so much information from your presentation this evening. We do want to invite people to ask questions. Again, feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and you can access that. It looks like a speech bubble, whether you're using a computer or a tablet. It should look like a little speech bubble, like a comic chat. One of the things that I am wondering is, when you're looking for when you were doing this research, just looking through the almanacs and looking through all this information, like, what was one of the most challenging things for you to find?
Well, you mean that we found, or that we didn't, that we were looking for?
I guess both. Like, what was something that you found that just blew your socks off, and what was something that you were hoping to find that you couldn't find?
Oh, well, there was a lot of stuff that was really interesting. For me, I think the thing that most sort of, you know, got my attention was that Daniel Leeds is one of the very first people in North America to support the idea that the Earth goes around the sun. This was something that people were still being jailed for believing in Europe, and he puts it into the Almanac. You know, he was kind of out there on the edge, you know, intellectually speaking. He liked to berate his readers for not reading enough, you know, for spending too much time in the bars and the pubs instead of, you know, there's a place where he says, stop smoking, stop drinking, save your money, and buy books. He probably had one of the biggest personal libraries in the colonies at the time. One of the really frustrating things for us was that we couldn't find what happened to his library. It probably got broken up over the years, and just sort of dissipated or destroyed or whatever, which is unfortunate. There are still a lot of Leedses in the world. You can't go in South Jersey anywhere and without running into streets named after the Leeds family. The Leeds family basically founds Atlantic City. The first mayor of Atlantic City was a Leeds, and so they're still around. I've had Leeds family members contact me over the years saying, thank you so much, because sort of in a way it's like a biography of the Leeds family, because you can't tell. Frank and I realized very quickly that you can't tell the Jersey's Devil story without telling the Leeds family story, and it's a Quaker story, and so that was kind of fun. One of the things I was hoping to find that we didn't. We never, the whole thing about Anne Hutchinson is just conjecture on our part. She sort of fits the mold. She's there around the right time, but we could never find anything, because we historians, our great failing in life is that we're always looking for documents. We always want to see a letter or a government record or something where words say this person was called Mother Leeds, and we were never able to find that. So that was kind of disappointing.
And then we do that. Thank you so much for answering those. And then we have a question from one of our participants this evening.
Okay.
Why is the Jersey Devil so strongly associated with the Pine Barrens? Did that come from the museum?
Yes, the Ninth and Archstein Museum, they are actually the very first people to go on a monster hunt. It was all a big publicity ploy. They got guys who had been clowns for Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, and they got a big cart with a cage on it, which they put a canvas tarp over, and they said, we're going into the Pine Barrens, and they went into the Pine Barrens in the middle of the night, and they started shooting off guns into the air and screaming and making screaming sounds, so people would think they were fighting with a monster. It's very much like if you remember the very first Jurassic Park movie, where there's that scene where the cage is rattling and there's something in there. That's what these guys did. I'd be willing to bet money that Spielberg knew this story and sort of updated it for Jurassic Park. So that's where the Pine Barrens thing comes into play.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that question and for that answer. Someone did want to let them know they wrote you a private message thanking you on the chat, and that people are thanking on the chat for such a wonderful presentation. I'm going to just give it one more second to see if we have any more questions that are coming through, because typing can be a little bit slower than speaking. But I do think it's such a fascinating topic, and I'm someone who I think also when you're in that moment and you hear something and you're out in the woods and it's dark, I just think your mind is very powerful, right? And the things that you can create in your head. But I also thought it was interesting you talking about Ben Franklin, where he was, I'm going to make up this totally crazy thing, but like you said, the crazier it is, the more likely it is that people will believe it. And I think that still happens today.
Of course, sure.
Yeah. So I thought that was
he's one of the first people in America to make that connection.
Yes.
That if you tell a silly little lie, people won't believe it. But if you tell an outrageous lie, people will believe it.
Well, and the power of just the word, right? Just spreading the word from one person to another.
And remember, this is at a time before there's any sort of, there's no electricity. There's no telephones, there's no TV, there's no radio, there's there's none of the social media stuff that we take for granted today. And yet this story still spread by almanacs and by spreading by word of mouth.
And I liked your analogy of the almanac to what we have for social media today, that's how that word would be spread, was through that medium. There is another question, so I'm glad that we were chatting. So another participant, is there any information as to why Titan Leeds and Ben Franklin did not like each other?
Well, Franklin knew that the Leeds Almanac was the big competition. And he wanted to, that's what he had to go up against. And so he figures, well, I'll just go after Titan Leeds. I'll just pick him out. People know the Leeds family, and I'll just make up some outrageous crap, and that will make people want to buy Poor Richard's Almanac and not the Leeds Almanac. And and it works. If you ask the average person today, name a colonial era almanac, 9 times out of 10 people will say Poor Richard's Almanac, and nobody remembers the Leeds Almanac anymore, despite the fact that at one time it was the best-selling almanac in the East Coast.
Thank you so much. There are people here from Middletowns that wanted a family that are just saying hello and thank you. And I don't see any other questions coming in. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Regal, for spending time with us this evening and just sharing such fascinating information.
Thanks for everybody for tuning in.
And good night, everybody. And please stay safe out there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen and family.